Very briefly, the Tet Offensive was an attack launched by the North Vietnamese Politburo. It was launched in coordination with the National Liberation Front of Viet Cong. It was in January of 1968. Over the course of the Tet Offensive, many, many more communists were killed than Americans or South Vietnamese. All the territory that the communists tried to seize was taken back in a matter of hours or a matter of days. There's one exception to this. That's the old imperial capital of Hue. There it took U.S. Marines a month to liberate Hue. When they did so, they discovered mass graves of innocent South Vietnamese who had been buried alive with their hands tied behind their backs, evidence for the world's eyes of communist brutality. The communist Viet Cong did manage to break into the U.S. Embassy compound in Saigon, but every one of them were killed, and the building was open for business as usual the next day. So by any measure, the United States and South Vietnam won the Tet Offensive. And we know now, because scholars like Hang Nguyen have gone to the archives of Hanoi, that the North Vietnamese Politburo, especially the leader, Le Duan, expected there to be a general uprising in South Vietnam that would throw the Americans out and reunify the country under communist control. And obviously that didn't happen. It didn't happen. So the North Vietnamese considered the Tet Offensive a disaster at first. But then it becomes obvious that the effect of this in the United States is incredibly damaging. It saps a lot of morale. And there are a couple of reasons for this, I think. First of all, General William Westmoreland, who was the overall military commander in Vietnam at the time, had made a tour of the United States in November of '67, just a couple months before the Tet Offensive, in which he said to many groups, including a joint session of Congress, the war is almost over, the enemy's hopes are bankrupt, victory's right around the corner, and then all of a sudden comes this offensive. And that doesn't seem to square with what the government is saying. And it makes Westmoreland look either dishonest or incompetent. And by extension, the same things apply to his boss, Lyndon Johnson, the president. But I think most important was that although we showed that the communists could not overrun any place in South Vietnam, they showed that not a single part of the country was secure. Not even the U.S. Embassy in the South Vietnamese capital. After military assistance for 20 years, after active U.S. military involvement for almost 3 years, after more bombs that had been dropped in the whole of World War II, Saigon, other places, still weren't secure. The North could still launch an attack like this. And if Westmoreland claimed, as he did, that 200,000 more men would do the trick, if Johnson would just give him 200,000 more men, how many times had he been wrong before? How many times had the North Vietnamese made him look foolish? That is why Johnson turned down his request for more troops, why Johnson said, I'm bowing out of the next presidential election, and why the Tet Offensive really marks that point where, up to that point, American presence in Vietnam kept growing. After Tet, it steadily declined. That's the big. That's why I think the Tet Offensive is most important. It's a fateful tipping point. Escalation and then de-escalation. The incoming Richard Nixon administration knew that victory in Vietnam was out of the question. They had to find some face-saving way of getting out. Nixon called it peace with honor. But the solution was not to add more troops. So that's why the Tet Offensive is a major watershed in the war.